Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. It is the morning after the night before. I'm joined, as always, with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, reading the comments last time, I think I've got. It's almost telling me I'm talking too much. I've got to let you talk a bit more. Mate. So, tell me how you're doing, bro.
Yeah, I'm not bad, mate. Not bad. Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we really could have done with a win this time around, because last week we sort of did this big dissect into sort of where the club is right now, where it's going, what's going wrong, and it sort of feels like after this week the similar conversations need to be had, but perhaps we were a little bit further down the line in terms of sort of it felt last night, and this is probably the cause of concern is I think back to it's very easy to remember when you knew that a manager's time is nearing an end. I remember Paul Lambert. It was a game away at Hull. I think we lost 2-0. And there's just this sort of feeling of, I think this is the end now. Obviously for Bruce, it was slightly more infamous. And then obviously this game with Dean, it did sort of have that feeling, didn't it, mate? You know, it's sort of when you're getting towards the latter minutes of the game, and it's just that sort of I don't want to say hopeless, because I don't like using that word, but sort of just throwing on the strikers, hoping for a different result, and it's just sort of it all felt a little bit sad. Dean's face at the end. I mean, I saw you tweet about it, mate. It's just sad, isn't it? It's like that man. That's a man that is definitely feeling the weight of it, and when that full-time whistle goes, it perhaps mark the end of what's been, I hope not, but perhaps we are coming to the end of what's been a really brilliant era.
Yeah, I think my little pause of silence there has just kind of said it all from me. I hate to say it, and I think for the longest time I've probably been in denial. I think I've always been fairly convinced that Dean can turn this around given the time. But there aren't many managers who lose 5 games in a row and seem to get things back on track, or at least are afforded the opportunity to, which is probably the more important thing to preface there, because in any line of work, if you're bad at your job, if you're not getting the results that you need to get in, if you're not hitting the markers that you should be doing, more often than not, you're met with the chop. And I think what makes it so difficult for myself and you, Dan, to sort of speak on your behalf for a second is that Dean has given us so many good times. And of course, at the time of recording this, we're about sort of an hour out from the Manchester derby, so Dean hasn't gone yet. It kind of feels like it could happen at any point. The international break's happening. Now is the time to change a manager if you are going to. We've seen that in the past. Newcastle still haven't appointed a manager, but they look fairly close to getting Eddie Howe in at this point. That all seems to be sort of agreed in principle. But I think, I think one thing that we need to, maybe this is just me, maybe I feel like a lot of the Dean talk has always been fairly harsh, and I think you can certainly criticize a manager for how they set the team up if they're continually getting it wrong. I'm not saying that any sort of criticism of the manager has ever been invalid. I think for the longest time, Dan, I think for integrity's sake, it's fair to maintain that out of the two of us, you have questioned Dean a lot more than I have, which I think is completely fair to have done so. However, you come on Twitter and you see so many accounts. I saw a tweet yesterday. I just realised I won, and I'm thinking, like, you're a 15-year-old faceless AVI football Twitter account, man. Like, you're not fucking Thanos. Like, let's not act like you've just wiped out half of the fucking universe and restored balance because you think Dean Smith isn't the manager. Like, I feel like people and again, I kind of got a bit of stick from this now. I know I'm ranting again. I'm that comment's really in my head rent free. But I kind of got a bit of stick for this. I'm sure you'd seen my tweet about Tyrone down. A lot of people are saying, this kind of stuff isn't relevant. But for those of you who hadn't seen, Odds Bible, absolute scum of the earth, tweeted a sort of below the belt tweet that they knew would get people engaged. Listen, like, we both work in social. We're not stupid, Dan. We know exactly what Sport Bible were doing and what they were trying to instigate, and what they knew they would instigate as well, which was more what I was kind of getting at with my tweet, which I think some people didn't really understand. Initiating a sort of pile on Tyrone like that, with someone who, openly has mental health struggles. Bit of a scummy move, in my opinion. A lot of people seem to agree the tweet's kind of blown up. But nevertheless, the point, the long and convoluted way of me saying, people more often than not do not or are not considering the sort of human factor to this. Now, as I was just telling you off air, Dan, I've just watched a minute and a half of Matt Target, almost what felt like holding back the tears, being forced to kind of explain himself and the performance. And at no point did he out the manager. At no point was any of that kind of said. It was a very difficult watch, and kind of seeing Dean struggle as he did last night in his presser, going up and clapping the fans, shaking the hands of all of his coaches. I feel like people forget Dean Smith is a Villa fan. He is hurting just as much as we are. Mm-hmm. And it's almost heightened because, there is some real jeopardy for him, because it's his job as well. Not only is this one of the passions of his life, the football club, the institution that he supports and has done, his family has done for generations, but he's kind of the face of a declining Aston Villa right now. So I feel like some of the talk about Dean it cuts deep, man, because I feel like some people don't consider that he's also hurting right now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, mate. And it's a strange one for Dean, because his level as a manager, I don't think, has been established. So it's like, in terms of his next job, do you see a Premier League club picking up Dean Smith? I don't think it's a sticky one, because I feel like, unfortunately, his legacy in terms of wider football and how opposition fans see him is the manager that couldn't do it without Jack Grealish. And that's long been the criticism. So partially from some Villa fans, I think the stats are there to say. I think we've even questioned it ourselves at the podcast. Is his record without Grealish isn't pretty. I saw a stat. We've lost more games in 2021 than any other Premier League team, and unfortunately, those kind of stats, that is a number, that is a fact, that these owners have a constant mantra of progression and wanting to get better every season, not with every game, but that, I think we all saw that Jack Grealish was a setback, but we still wanted to show evident signs that this club is heading in the right direction. And that stat tells you that the club is not, if you look at the recent form table, we're sat in the relegation zone, and we cannot be dragged back into that. We saw the stress and the worry that it puts on the club. So I think, unfortunately, that these kind of signs you can't ignore, and these owners won't ignore, and nor would I expect them, nor want them to be honest with you. I think, football is unfortunately a cruel game nowadays, and you can't be blinded by allegiances and stuff like that. And I'm sure a lot of Villa fans, including myself, would like the romance to go on a little bit more and to try and turn this ship around. But these owners have bigger ambitions than that. They're not here to play out fairy tales. They're here I'm going to say in a business sense, not in terms of financially, but in terms of there is a model, there is a plan that they have to follow. And who is at the top of that is not necessarily their biggest concern. If they can find a manager now that they can come in that I believe going to take us to places that Dean can't, then they'll call that shot. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, unfortunately, that, yeah, we want them to. But it's a difficult one for Dean, because I do probably feel like he'll fall back into the Championship. I feel like, in terms of where clubs are more likely to take a gamble, where he has the better track record, his legacy and his I don't know what the word is, but he's proven himself in that league, and in the Premier League he hasn't really. I mean, we had a great season last year, but last season will always be taken with an asterisk, and that's unfortunately the reality of that COVID season, the 7-2 against Liverpool, all these kind of results. When we talk about them in the future, the response is always going to be, but it was that COVID year, wasn't it? It was when we had no fans in. It was when teams were squads were half full one week to the next because there were positive tests, and some games were rescheduled, some games were cancelled. It's like that season will forever be looked at as a but you can't really take it at face value. So unfortunately, I think Dean will have to drop down a division to find his next job, and that's a real shame, mate. That's a real shame. But I think, you can look at this one of two ways. And if Dean is to go, and I don't want to make the podcast all about Dean Smith getting sacked, because if he doesn't, it's a bad listen, isn't it? But, if he is to go, then he has such a fantastic history at this club, and my favourite manager in my lifetime by a mile. I think regardless of the situation, no matter how bad we are, when he eventually goes, it will be a very sad day, because he's turned this club around. And the reason that, unfortunately, the owners have this ambition that they want constant progression, which may end up being the very reason he gets sacked, is because of him. It's a sort of weird situation, isn't it? It's because of he's the man that got promoted. He's the man that started on this journey. And unfortunately, it's the journey that he began is the one that he might not be able to finish. And it would be a shame to see him go, mate. But I think at this point, it did have that feeling last night, as I said at the top of the podcast. And those stats, like I said, the amount of losses, the amount of games we're losing, just hopelessly losing, you can't ignore.
I think what's difficult to understand as well, Dan, is that sort of we've gone from we've been stripped of our identity, not only losing a player like Jack Grealish, but the system. I know we kind of experimented with 3-5-2 in the first year, but Grealish was kind of yet to hit the stratosphere that he kind of had entered into the following season. I don't think you play that system with him in the side still. I don't think you go back to the 3-4, the 3-5-2, however you want to look at it, the 5-3-2 that Dean's constantly kind of tinkered with, and it's just he's a shadow of his former self. I'll always remember I believe his first game was Swansea. The post-match interview afterwards, listening to that in the car on the way back, and hearing how positively he spoke, and maybe that was it was kind of juxtaposed by the inept bitterness that we got after every sort of 90 minutes from Steve Bruce. But hearing about Dean like setting traps and knowing who the press trigger was for our opponents, and Villa knowing how to sort of outwit their opponents, I think it's fair to say we haven't really ever seen that in the Premier League. I think up until now I would have been reluctant to have said Dean is out of his sort of depth as a Premier League manager, but I think for all the reasons you just listed there, mate, right now things just aren't working, and I guess I think as well, if Dean does end up losing his job, which it does kind of seem likely at some point, it's more kind of when, not if, at this point. I think Dean's probably one of the unluckiest managers we've had in a long time as well. I think it's safe to say, because not many managers do have a sort of a pillar to rely on. A player as good as Grealish at most jobs that they get. So it's fair to assume that a lot of Dean's time was spent figuring out how to get the best out of Grealish, and I think we've kind of seen how damaging that can be to the players. The fractures in the relationship we've seen over the past few weeks, all month, down with the alleged Sanson bottle incident, and with Courtney and Tyrone having it out, and with Buendia's frustrations. I think time has kind of revealed a lot of what Dean actually really did centre around Jack Grealish, and I think the wins and the performances that came off the back of that kind of maybe helped paper over the cracks in the dressing room, maybe just helped improve the vibe at the club a bit more. But at no point this season have Villa had a fully fit squad. And if we are to talk about last night, Dan, and the goal, whilst Villa overall were quite poor in the first half and much better shown in the second half, the goal comes from just a drastically unlucky deflection off the back of Matty Cash, and a very, very well taken goal from Armstrong as well. We have to asterisk that. But again, I think Villa conceded the most amount of goals in the opening.
What is going on here?
I think the podcast just kind of cut out a bit there. We'll roll with it. Can you hear me?
Wait, what, mate? My Zoom I just went in and out of the call.
That's mad. Do you know what? We're going to leave that in because you're here now, Dan. You're back. We're still recording. So that's good.
That's-
I can hear you.
Sorry, mate. Carry on. Sorry.
It's Dean Smith picking up your internet, mate. I don't want us to record this podcast.
Mate. Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh God, but yeah, I think we can't. I think any manager who loses their job it is not necessarily unlucky, but I think that's what happened. Villa have spent a lot of money, so the argument will always be, well, Dean's had the money. He's signed players to replace Grealish. I think as well, part of the blame sort of will lie on the people behind the scenes at the club, Dan, because it's glaringly obvious Villa needed a midfielder, and to go. I know I mentioned it in the last podcast, but to go and pursue Ward-Prowse in the manner that we did, to end up with no central midfielder, regardless of whether it was Ward-Prowse or if it was Cheek Decore or whoever else Villa were linked with in the summer, Weston McKennie. It's embarrassing, and I think Christian Purslow will have a lot to answer for in that situation.
Definitely.
I don't want to say Dean's been sold short, but glaringly obvious issues weren't really addressed.
Well, mate, I mean, nothing says it better. Look at our bench yesterday. We've spent 300 odd million since getting promoted to the Premier League. We had a full in our third season, and hey, we were his biggest fans on this podcast. But third season, it's still Keenan Davis at 70 minutes to try and change a game. What does that say about our recruitment? You can't say that he's not been backed. That's not fair to say, because the money's been there. But you have to look at the recruitment team, because it's like, we've spent 300 million since going to the Premier League, and our entire bench yesterday. And I know there were injuries. So look, hey, I'm not, you still got Sanson and Louise and all that. They're all out. And yeah, fair enough. Const's been sent off and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, you're missing a few key names. But look, I don't want to, I sort of texted a few mates and stuff when I saw the bench yesterday. And it's like, I don't want to sound like I back these kids as much as I can, but like, where is the investment? Where are these players that we've spent 300 million pounds on? If we're at this critical point in our sort of recent club history, and we've got an entire under 23s bench, it's like it doesn't inspire. Bar Ashley Young, sorry, I should caveat, and Jed Steer and stuff like that. But for the vast majority, we had this bench of kids, and that's a sort of, I think that backs your point more than anything, doesn't it, mate? Is that we're still here with these same faces. The recruitment. I mean, Suso, you look back at it, there were some good moments, there were some bad moments. You've got the likes of Purslow come in and stuff like that. I think, I was so hot on what he was doing at the start, but I think Dean's team around him, Austin McPhee, set pieces in the recent games have been woeful, mate. Absolutely dreadful. Last night, some of the things that I was seeing, even you go back to the West Ham game, there was one point when we tried passing a corner into the box. And it's like, look, there are time for convoluted and clever set pieces. I'm not saying this man isn't capable of them, but they've been dreadful the last few games. Absolutely dreadful. And when your team is bereft of ideas and you're struggling to create things in open play, set pieces can really be crucial. And it's like, it's not the time to be experimenting. It's just not working. And like, I don't know whether that perhaps says that the Dean Smith's role at the club has definitely come to an end, in that, you even got these guys who are supposedly experts in their field, and they're not even working under his stewardship. You can see it from both sides of the coin, but whatever it is, mate, is that there's so many different aspects of the club which aren't working at the moment. And when I spoke about this on the last podcast, it is very sort of typical of, as Villa fans, and that we all call for the manager's head, and then we get linked with a name like Fonseca, and then we all shit the bed because Villa fans don't want Paulo Fonseca. And it's like, you can't have it, but you can't have it both ways. If you call for the managers to be sacked, you have to live and die by the sword. Whoever the club then wants to go for, whatever the direction, it's on our backs, because we all sat here calling for the man's head. And it's like, for the record, I think Fonseca would actually be quite interesting. Looking at it, seeing how come in, and it didn't start very well, but seeing how the likes of Bruno Lage has come in and what he's done with Wolves in recent games I think it would follow a similar kind of model. I think a lot of fans do have worries about how long he sticks at the club. His tenures aren't exactly the longest. I don't think that's often entirely his fault. You look back at the situation of Roma and stuff like that, and it's like, there were so many other factors going on at the club at the time that made him leave. seen names like Lucien Favre get topped around as well. And so it's nice to see we're linked with attacking managers and stuff like that. But, you know, I do sort of urge Villa fans, like, you know, if we all sit here and we're all sort of either calling or like me and you are, Dan, acknowledging that the time for the manager is up, we have to then just accept whoever comes next, because, you know, you can't have it both ways, unfortunately. There's not an abundance of brilliant managers out there, really.
No, I mean, you either take a risk and go for an unknown, or again, you know, even like a Favre is still a risk. You know, he had his biggest job at Dortmund recently, did an okay job at Nice. But again, you know, I think this is a point that I made in some previous podcasts, Dan. If you're going to name me a manager who you want to replace Dean Smith, that is perfectly fine, right? Don't name me a manager who is known for playing a 3-back system when you've, you know, absolutely nailed on Dean's sacking on the fact that we have persisted with a 3-back when it hasn't worked. Favre is known for playing, you know, a sort of 3-4-2-1. He played it at Dortmund. Even Fonseca played a 3-4-2-1 at Roma. I mean, Fonseca's predominantly known for playing a 4-2-3-1, which I think is what kind of intrigues me about Fonseca. But at Roma, you know, he had to change things up because it wasn't working. And with a formation like that, you have to have a focal point of your attack. And, you know, whether it be an Erling Haaland or an Edin Dzeko for Favre and Fonseca, Villa don't have that. So I think that, you know, again, that's something you have to consider. Villa are a team or a club, and with the players that we have available, that should idealistically be playing 4-2-3-1. I can't reiterate that enough. So maybe Fonseca is the man. I don't know. And you've got a load of people. I think something as well, Dan, that we should probably touch on. And I think on this podcast, one thing that we can't, I think we pride ourselves in the transfer room mills in stuff like that on well-researched, detailed analysis on players who have been linked with Aston Villa. And a lot of people are turning their nose up saying, oh, well, I guess you've been watching Shakhtar Donetsk every week then. Well, actually, no. But I've seen and I've been to Champions League games and watched Shakhtar Donetsk in the flesh against Manchester City, because I mean that draw happens every single year. I know you have too, Dan. So I feel like when we do talk about Shakhtar and Fonseca, that it does kind of come from a somewhat backed up sort of you know, source of information. We've seen them in the flesh. We've seen how they've been deployed, and just to sort of briefly, you know, talk on Fonseca, because I think that's probably the more likely of the few. I mean, Eric Ten Hag, people are calling for from Ajax. He's not coming here. He was into the Manchester United job a few weeks ago. You know, the 4-2-3-1 that was sort of made Shakhtar Donetsk what they are. And yes, you know, they are the Manchester City of Ukraine, but, you know, regularly competing in the Champions League. A few wins against Man City, you know, made it to the last 16 a few years ago as well. I think, you know, what you have to look at, you know, is the system. And again, that 4-2-3-1 that we've seen that Villa should be playing is kind of what Fonseca did at Shakhtar. And, you know, to kind of shout the names that you listeners will be more familiar with, you have Fred as one of them sort of deep lying midfielders, who really is that sort of connection between the defence and the attack. Douglas Luiz ideally fills that role for Villa. Again, a player who's absent, and Villa looks so much better for having. And it is kind of a sort of a free-flowing, interchanging attack at Shakhtar. You know, you've got the likes of Bernard, who's at Everton now, Marlos, Tyson, players like that. It's a 4-2-3-1, and out of possession, it's a 4-4-2, which I think we saw bits of the other night, which was good. I think we saw Buendia, you know, press as that sort of false striker when Villa were out of possession more often than not. And then I think Bailey kind of changed that as well. So I think idealistically, does Fonseca fit the way that I think, you know, Perslow, everyone behind the scenes have kind of nailed Aston Villa on to be, specifically with the recruitment? Yes. Do I think it's a risk? Absolutely. Do I have a better name to throw in? Absolutely not, Dan.
Yeah, that's it, mate. That's it. You know, my worry is like, But the thing with Fonseca is that I actually think there's a lot to like about his career. He's the reason that Braga are on the map. I think he's the better fit than Lucien Favre. The reason that I said Braga are this sort of Europa League level team that you consistently see in European competition is because of him. He guided them up to the European spots. He won the Portuguese domestic cup with Braga. He then goes and has that very successful time over in Shakhtar Donetsk. Racks up like a ridiculous, it's like a 74% win rate, won 103 of his 139 games there, gets that big gig at Roma. And, I think he has a lot of big moments with Roma. People forget the sort of situation that the club was in before he came in. He guided them back up into Europe. Won. He got through the Champions League knockout rounds at the hands of Manchester City. It's a game that people forget, but he beat them on aggregate to get through into the knockouts. And he plays a very attacking style, and I think it's his manager and that sort of ilk is becoming increasingly more commonplace nowadays. And I think it's one of those where I think it would be a risk. And I think, the Villa fans are worried about that, that length, the length of his tenures and stuff like that. But that 4-2-3-1 is nailed on. It's that younger, attacking-minded coach that you see favoured in modern football. It's that aggressive attacking nature, a lot of progressive passing, an emphasis on the wings, which sort of suits the signings that we've made. And look, I know it was a less than stellar run at Roma and stuff like that, but there's a lot to like about this guy and stuff like that. So I would urge Villa fans, when we're considering this, because he sort of does seem to be the lead candidate for the job at the moment, just to take a little bit of time, take a breath, have a look into this guy, have a read into him, because it's one of those where it really could work. It really could work. It's a manager that I would say is the best fit out there for the club at the moment. I don't think it's necessarily an ideal one. When Bruce got sacked, it was obvious, wasn't it, really? All arrows led, all roads led to Smith. It was just, he was sort of hinting at it in his press conferences, wasn't really addressing the question. And it's sort of like, it was obvious that he was the man we needed to go and get. It's not as obvious now. And so Fonseca probably would be my choice at the moment. I think he's probably the most suited. And so, the last thing we want to do, Jesus Christ, mate, is after writing off Dean Smith, write a manager before he's already come in. Do you know what I mean? So Villa fans have got to, do the reading. There's a lot to like about this guy.
Fingers crossed, mate. Fingers crossed. I think, again, as you said, mate, it's one of them ones, like, if you're so hell-bent on getting Dean Smith out of this club, then whoever comes in, you have to back till the very end. Again, it's otherwise we find ourselves in a similar situation in a year or two's time. And again, you can say that context is key, and you can look at that with Fonseca, you can look at that with Smith, even look at it with Favre. But I think ultimately, it's safe to say at this point that Dean's time is coming to an end, which honestly breaks my heart, because he's provided us with so many memories and easily the best years supporting the club we've had. It's just one of them. It's going to be a tough one to take when it happens, if it happens. But now will be the time, Dan. And I think at this point, I think we've probably said everything that we need to say on Villa, on last night, on the managerial situation. There might be some podcasts during the international break. It depends what really happens with Villa. But we'd just like to, again, reiterate all the support. You guys have been absolutely incredible. The last podcast has done more views than I think we could have imagined, Dan, given the dire straits that the club is in right now. So, we'd just like to really reiterate how grateful we are for that. And, any final words from yourself, mate?
No, absolutely not, mate. It's one of those where it's I hope we don't speak over the international break, because if we do, it's more than likely going to be to address the arrival of a new manager. So hopefully I see you after Brighton, but if I do see you beforehand, mate, then it's to welcome in hopefully a very exciting new era. So whatever it may be, let's try and be happy about it. Just, God, how hard can that be? Try and see things through with a smile, maybe. But time will tell, mate.
Absolutely. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this podcast, which I find incredibly strange, to be honest, at this point, hit the like, comment your thoughts below on just the situation at the club right now. There's been some great comments from you guys recently. So yeah, we want to get that debate started in the comments. And yeah, if you haven't subscribed, it would mean the most if you could. We're on the road to 5,000 subscribers. So any subscriber who's watching this, it's about 58% of you guys who watch that aren't subscribed. So make sure you subscribe and put your bell notifications on so you never miss a podcast from Dan and I. Up the Villa.